The Sony Walkman. Released in 1979 for $150, about $650 today, it had two headphone jacks built into the top, so two people could listen to the exact same tape at once. By the time you got your hands on one, it was already a decade old, usually a hand-me-down from an older sibling or a parent's closet. It didn't matter. If you were a kid in the late 80s or early 90s, clipping a Walkman to your waistband was the first time music felt like it belonged to you alone, not the family stereo. But the detail almost nobody remembers is the hotline button. Press the orange button on top, and it would fade the cassette down and mix in the built-in microphone, so the second person on the other headphone jack could talk to you without ever pausing the tape. It's why you probably still have the specific, oddly precise muscle memory of rewinding a chewed-up cassette with a pencil, because letting fast forward do it alone would drain the batteries by lunchtime. By the mid-90s, portable CD players had caught up in price and blown past cassettes in sound quality, and Sony itself was already selling more CD Walkmans than tape ones by decade's end. Sony still sells a reissued cassette Walkman today, and original TPS-L2 units from 1979 now sell for $300 to $650 on the resale market, more than the thing cost new. The Discman. Sony's first portable CD player launched in 1984, and for its first 8 years on the market, it had a problem nobody advertised. It skipped if you so much as walked too fast. Once prices dropped enough for you to actually own one, mid to late 90s, the Discman became the Millennial default. It came with its own accessory economy you had to assemble piece by piece. The zippered CD wallet with 24 plastic sleeves, the car adapter that plugged into the tape deck, the AA battery pack because rechargeables never lasted the school day. What made the Discman unforgettable wasn't the sound, it was the walk. Sony didn't add real anti-skip protection, called electronic skip protection, until 1992. And even then, it only buffered about 3 seconds of audio in memory. Later versions stretched that to 40 seconds. Until you had one with a big enough buffer, running for the bus meant your music cutting out mid-song, which is why you learned to walk with a strange, gliding, don't jostle the backpack gait, just to keep a CD from skipping. By 2001, the arrival of solid-state MP3 players made the whole idea of a spinning disc that could skip look prehistoric almost overnight. Discmans never fully disappeared. They became a niche audiophile and vinyl-adjacent nostalgia item, still manufactured in limited runs today for people who specifically want the skip. The mini disc. Sony launched it in September 1992, promising CD-quality sound you could actually record onto, and in its first 12 months, sold just 50,000 players worldwide. For most millennials, the minidisc wasn't the default. It was the one kid in class who had one, usually because a parent worked in audio or imported electronics. If you were that kid, you were also the one everyone borrowed it from, because it recorded, and nothing else you owned at that age did. It never won, and the reason is almost a business school case study. The players cost close to $1,000 in some markets at launch. The recording software was clunky, and barely any pre-recorded albums were released on the format at all. So you needed a CD player anyway just to record from. Sony spent $30 million in 1998 alone trying to relaunch it as the year of the minidisc. That same year became, instead, the year MP3s broke through. Sony kept making minidisc hardware in shrinking numbers for another decade, but by the time recordable, rewritable discs were affordable enough for you to actually want one, the iPod already existed. The last minidisc hi-fi system shipped from Sony in 2013, almost 2 years after Spotify had already launched. The Diamond Rio PMP300. Announced in September 1998 for $199.95, it was the size of a deck of cards, held about an hour of music, and 3 weeks after it launched, the recording industry tried to sue it out of existence. Most people who remember the Rio at all remember it as the device that got Napster started. It didn't. Napster came out a year later. What actually happened is stranger. The Recording Industry Association of America sued Diamond Multimedia in October 1998, arguing the Rio was an illegal digital audio recording device under a 1992 law written for DAT tape decks. A judge denied the injunction. The Ninth Circuit later ruled that copying your own CDs onto the device was legal space shifting, And that ruling, not any hit song or platform, became the first real legal green light for the entire MP3 player industry that followed it. Diamond sold around 200,000 Rios after the lawsuit ended, then quietly left the MP3 player business within a few years as bigger players, literally and figuratively, took over. If you owned one, you were one of a couple 100,000 people on Earth who could legally carry downloaded music in your pocket before almost anyone else could, a full 3 years before the iPod existed. The Mix CD. By the early 2000s, burning one cost about the price of a blank CDR, a few cents to a quarter, and took roughly the length of the album itself, thanks to Napster, LimeWire, and a burning program called Nero running quietly in the background of the family computer. Here's the problem that actually created this ritual. The Diamond Rio and the MP3 players that followed it held maybe an hour of music, nowhere near enough for the hundreds of songs piling up on your hard drive from Napster. So you did the obvious workaround. You burned them onto a disc instead, which is why you're the generation that turned making someone a mix into a genuine social and romantic ritual. Not mailing a cassette like the generation before you, but building a 74-minute track list, printing a cover on the family inkjet, and writing the track order on the disc in Sharpie. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Those burned CDs are quietly dying. A pressed, store-bought CD stores data as physical pits stamped into plastic. It lasts decades untouched. A burned CDR stores data in a layer of organic dye that a laser altered, and that dye degrades chemically over time, especially with heat or sunlight. Archival estimates range from as little as 2 years for cheap discs to a few decades for good ones. That mix CD you burned for a middle school crush isn't just outdated. It may already be unreadable, sitting in a shoebox in a format nothing in your house can even open anymore. MP3 players, and later iTunes playlists, made burning a physical disc for someone feel almost antiquated within just a few years. You could just email a folder or hand someone a USB drive. The Mix CD lives on mostly as an aesthetic now, reissued as a throwback gift item or a specific kind of nostalgia post online. Ironic, given how many of the originals have already silently rotted in a shoebox. The iPod. Unveiled by Steve Jobs on October 23, 2001, for $399, it held 5 gigabytes, 1,000 songs in your pocket, and for its entire first year, it only worked with a Mac. That detail gets lost in hindsight. The device that would go on to define your generation's relationship with music launched as a niche, Mac-only accessory with no USB support at all. Just FireWire, a port most PCs of 2001 didn't even have. It took until July 2002 for a Windows-compatible version to exist, which meant if you were a PC household, you waited almost a year for the device everyone else already had. But what made the iPod unforgettable wasn't the storage, it was the wheel. The original scroll wheel was a real, physically rotating mechanical dial, not the touch-sensitive pad later models used, and that satisfying click and spin motion paired with the white earbuds that turned you into a walking advertisement on every subway and school bus in America is the image you still picture when someone says 2000s. It took until 2004 for the iPod to become the runaway hit it's remembered as, but once it didn't just beat the Discman and the Zune-era competitors, it effectively ended the standalone hard drive music player category as something anyone needed to think about. Across every generation and model, the iPod line went on to sell an estimated 450 million units. The iPod Shuffle. Announced in January 2005 for $99, it weighed less than an ounce, and Apple's entire pitch for it was that it didn't need a screen at all. This was Apple's answer to a market it hadn't touched yet. The flash memory, budget-friendly player that could clip to your gym shirt or hang from a lanyard around your neck at school. The Nano, launched the same year, split the difference. Small enough for your pocket, but with the color screen, the Shuffle skipped entirely. Apple's actual argument for shipping a music player with no way to see what song was playing was that most people listen to music on Shuffle anyway, so a screen was solving a problem nobody really had. A genuinely bold sell for a company that had spent years bragging about its menu navigation. It worked.
If you owned one, the only way you ever knew what song was coming next was to wait for it. Both lines quietly outlived almost every rival flash player on the market. SanDisk Sansa, Creative Zen, largely by being cheap enough to be a default birthday gift for over a decade.
Apple didn't discontinue the Shuffle and Nano until July 2017, by which point you were probably already using yours mainly as a backup device for the gym, not a primary music player. The Zune, Microsoft's answer to the iPod, launched on November 14, 2006, with 30 gigabytes of storage, Wi-Fi syncing, and one genuinely strange marketing decision. It came in brown. Microsoft had every advantage on paper: Windows dominance, deep pockets, a real hardware partner in Toshiba, and none of it mattered. In its very first launch week, the Zune captured just 9% of the US portable player market. The iPod held 63%, the same week, with a 5-year head start Microsoft never closed. If you were one of the rare millennials who actually owned a Zune, you know exactly what it felt like to explain, every single time someone saw it, why it wasn't an iPod. The device never cracked more than single-digit market share for its entire 6-year existence, and it was Windows PC only for years, the exact same mistake, in reverse, that had limited the original iPod. Microsoft kept trying anyway. A touchscreen Zune HD in 2009, a final refresh in 2010, still stuck in the low single digits of a market Apple owned outright. Microsoft quietly discontinued all Zune hardware in October 2011. On the same day, Apple was widely expected to unveil a new iPhone, a scheduling coincidence that summed up the entire rivalry. Zune's software and interface didn't die with the hardware. Pieces of it resurfaced inside the original Windows Phone, and reportedly, early design thinking for Windows 8, which makes it one of the only failed gadgets of the era that quietly shaped the products that came after it. 2007. Apple releases the iPhone, folding an iPod into a phone for the first time. And within about 5 years, the idea of carrying a separate device just to play music had basically disappeared. This is the moment that closes the loop on everything before it. The Walkman, the Discman, the Rio, the iPod itself. Every device you just heard about existed because music and phones used to be two completely separate objects you had to carry in two different pockets. The App Store, launched in 2008, is really what finished the job. Not just because your phone could now play music, but because Spotify's mobile app in 2009 and streaming in general meant you no longer needed to own the music at all, let alone a device dedicated to holding it. The entire multi-decade arc of this episode, cassette to CD to MP3 file to streaming, collapsed into a single icon on your home screen. Apple, the same company that saved itself with the iPod, ended up quietly retiring every device this episode just walked you through, one at a time, until none were left. If you're watching this on a phone right now, that phone is doing the job of a Walkman, a Discman, a mini disc recorder, a Diamond Rio, an iPod, and a Zune all at once. And you probably haven't thought about any of them in years, until now.